Hello, and a massive hello to everybody. How we all doing? Rocking and rolling in a free world. Welcome. 30th of November, 2017. No trade calls, no recommendations. Everybody responds for their own stuff. We're here for educational purpose only. So, hope everybody's having a great day. A little impromptu session here. Nothing is planned. Everything is on the table. We can look at whatever charts, whatever, we can discuss anything. Questions on trading, life, deadlifting, anything you want, markets. Today's actually the B day of the blog. So blog is about, today is 8 years old, I think, 8 or 9. I always forget. But it's a birthday blog, so we're going to do something a little bit special here and just hang around for a little bit. Thanks, Debbie. And I don't know, we'll run as long as as we need to. If we've got interesting things to discuss, you know, it could be 15-minute, 30-minute, 40-minute, we'll see. Nothing's planned. So if anybody has anything they want to look at, shoot. Hey, True, how's it going? Good to see a lot of usual suspects live. Yeah, don't be shy. Don't be afraid to retweet the link out. The more the merrier. So more people in, more questions, the more we'll stay on. So thanks, man. So if anybody has anything they desperately want to look at, shoot. If not, we'll just go through some charts, or if nobody has any questions, then we'll shut it down straight away. So again, interesting action in the market across the board, right? Yesterday is quite interesting in the sense that we had, everybody's talking about this rotation out of the out of tech into other names. Thinking is that it's rotating out of what's going to benefit less from the alleged tax cut, right? But again, we'll have to see what happens. What's interesting is that the NASDAQ wasn't even down like 2%, and we had like a 61 billion plunge, right? So, the FANG stocks is like the largest on record in terms of notional, like Facebook down 4%, Amazon down 2.7, Netflix 5.6, Google 2.5, and it wasn't even over 2% down. So it just shows you how high we were. It's normal. The higher we go, the more important the drop is going to represent in notional, but still fairly interesting as we're seeing volatility pick up, right? And this is quite constructive because you would not expect it to just go from a low point straight up like this. It's good to see it starting to pick up. You get a couple of positive daily closes, then we'll see if we can continue with the momentum, right? So, hey, Donnie, how's it going? So Euro USD, do you have any specific question on Euro USD? Just a general review, or is there a specific time frame you're looking at? If you want anything specific, shoot. The more specific you are with the question, the more specific I can try and be with the answer, right? So as we wait, in terms of the bigger picture, and then we can maybe drill down on a shorter time frame on Euro. What's happening on Euro? So basically, we've had this very aggressive breakdown, right? Breaking through this level back in 2015, and essentially what has happened is we've been, we chopped around for a long time here, right? With everybody calling for the euro to die, to go to parity, etc. Now, our base case, what we had been discussing, right, was the fact that, especially into this year, right, towards the back end of last year, the fact that we'd gone through those lows and couldn't get, hey, Knut, how's it going? We couldn't get any traction, right? Was a particularly interesting play to try and play for a move all the way back into the top side of this chop zone, right? Expecting it to stay in range until it doesn't, right? Now, once it broke above, we said we entered into this very, very choppy no man's land, and we had to see what the market was going to do. We needed to see a decisive break outside of the zone to see if we were going to complete back into the 126s, or if we were going to end up, this was some kind of a false break, and we were going to end up staying inside this choppy area, right? Now, the key here for us, especially if you're looking at on the weekly, right? If you look at some of these moving averages, right? So you see, all the moving averages in sync, 200, the 100, the 50, and then we start to go sideways where the moving averages flatten out. Now here it's attempting a strong rotation upward, right? Now, as long as we hold, number one, above this 200, our base case is that we're bid, and we're gonna try and move up in extensions to try and continue this move back into the 126s, right? Whereas we wouldn't have been surprised to see a healthy move where we sold off back into the 50 back pretty much of this retracement, the two moving averages held, and then we completed. Here what it's doing is, does it make sense now? It's trying to move in extensions on a very little, on a small retracement, right, in terms of the bigger picture. So a lot of people were getting carried away with the head and shoulders and the move back down, and we said, yeah, sure, as long as we hold back below this 200, we could get traction to the downside. But after this kind of close, it needs to move quick. You want to see the pain trade. You want to see at least a couple of days of this accelerating lower. The fact that it couldn't, right, and you got this weekly reversal here, again, we said very high odds that, you know, this is beautiful, is asymmetrical opportunity to try and play for a bounce here. So that's what's in place. So I think here a lot of people are getting off guard, caught off guard, or a lot of people thinking too hard about it, or at least harder than we would be thinking about it, right? The way we're looking at this is no change. Bigger picture. This is still attempting this bigger rotation outside of this zone back to move into, you know, say 126s. And as long as it doesn't close below the 200, this attempt is still in play. Okay? Now, in terms of the shorter time frames, we've got a lot of chop, and it's not surprising because we're waiting for, you know, a lot of stuff has to come out of Washington. We have to see what the central banks do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here we're just stuck inside a trading range. So we understand what's going on in terms of the bigger picture, and you know, whatever you're trying to do if you're playing longer term, but shorter term, it's just a sideways chop inside this range, right? So here the edge was to try and get long for a move higher, and as long as we hold into these highs, most likely the edge is going to be to try and play a little bit of a downside, right? I think it's extremely choppy right here. Intraday you had that reversal, so a lot of people playing it to the downside, and we got a little bit of follow through here, which looked quite nicely, but it's choppy with these areas. So it's kind of like the inverse of the dollar index, you know, dollar index mainly composed of Europe. So right here, of euro, sorry. So here it's very choppy. You're probably going to have these moving averages here supporting, and you're going to have these sells in terms of resistance. So don't be surprised by moves here. We would call this velocity of move inside range. This could move very quick, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything. So a little bit choppy, I think shorter term, this looked like it was a nice attempt for a move down, but clearly look at the resistance. We broke up previous resistance as support basing higher. So right now it looks like, even though the premise is still choppy inside this range, you could argue that this is heavy, but you could also argue that the bulls still have the upper hand, and any dip here is still a buy for a move back to the top end of the range. But I think the one word is very, very choppy inside this area. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. My pleasure, man. Thanks for the question. Yeah, you know, here we'll have to see if we get the usual grind higher in the overnight session on the equities as we get into New York Open. I mean, after you see the close we saw on NASDAQ yesterday, you would expect those lows to get tested on the NQs on the NASDAQ, right? You would not expect the market to not retest lower, right? And we had some fairly steady sell pressure on the NASDAQ yesterday. If you look at it even from a 1 hour basis, right? See how the pressure is still on. So you would expect these lows to get tested at least into the open today. Yeah, you know, you've got a lot of heavy action across the board. Not surprising if you see the open here on the FTSE. It's not looking too great. I mean, in terms of the bigger picture, it's not pretty, right? You see what we're looking for. There's very nice shorts here on this failure to hold here for a move back into these lows. That's pretty much done. But you see how you've got this huge cluster of these, all the moving averages here. This is very similar to the action we saw on J and K, right? Where it's hovering here. So if this breaks on the FTSE, especially if you see this level let go and from a closing basis we close the day or the week below, then you would really expect this to try and come and accelerate much lower. And you would expect it to get uglier, possibly fairly quickly, all the way back down into 7100 kind of range. Looking a little bit heavy. Hey Jim, how do you see Amazon? And by the way, if you ask a question, no need to ask it again. I'll get to it. I'm just going through all of them. How do you see Amazon and Facebook now after the move a couple of days? Sure, Amazon and Facebook. So we've been talking about, all those tech names that if you saw the blog post yesterday, and even on Twitter the day before, we said eyes on tech, eyes on tech, eyes on tech. It's all about tech, right? And here, there are a lot of nice little plays to the short side on Apple here. This failure right back into more neutral in the 165s. I think the 165 is key here on Apple, right? If we can hold above, this is a bounce zone. You see the bids are trying to come in and support this. We had this gap here, and then it caught a bid, and you see how the bids are coming here. So today's really, really key. I think a lot of people are going to be trying to sell bounces. If this level holds, then don't be surprised to just see a complete move all the way back into those highs. And then we'll have to see if the lower highs continue. But here, if we open heavy and we get a daily close below the 165, then I think it could easily spark that move all the way back into the 152, 145. This is really a key pivotal zone for Apple, but it's looking a little bit heavy. It's very early. Well, not early. We got one day left, but get a little hint. Start to look at the weeklies. Start to look at how these weeklies are starting to look. They're pretty interesting, right? So if you go on Amazon, let's look at some of these tech names here. Amazon, we had a beautiful opportunity here to the short side, right? You got that post-Thanksgiving, you get this big move, little gap up and a negative close. This is a very nice little short, right? On the move back up, you've got very, very tight risk. And if it rolls, you've got a fairly decent reward on the trade. So right now, Amazon, it's fairly similar to Apple. As long as those highs hold, it could get heavy. We think here the potential is for this to come right back down into this 185 pivotal, but we would not be surprised to see this come back down into the 1,000 mark. It's all about these highs now and see if we get a little bit of follow through, right? We've been talking about all this follow through, right? So that's going to be fairly interesting. Hey man, yeah, it's being recorded. I'll post it on YouTube afterwards. So what else have we got? Let's go through some of these tech names. And then we got Facebook again. Another one with we've been posting this chart on the blog for a long time, right? All about these highs. Look at this, another very nice negative close at highs, right where it pressed very hard. A beautiful little trade for the move back to the 175.30s. Right? So here, it's similar to that initial chart we saw on Apple, Jim, right? Whereas this now is a big pivotal zone, right? Of course, don't forget to look at what the weekly is starting to shape. Look at this is one ugly chart. You see what this looks like on the weekly? Basically, engulfed 4 previous days back down, back this big level. Does that make sense? especially if this closes below on the week, this is one hell of an ugly chart. So, we'd be looking at a move back into the 153.70s. Does that make sense? So all these, what's been frustrating in this market is that we haven't seen or we haven't got any follow through. So it's really all about follow through. But, you've seen a lot of, fairly decent hit on some of these tech names. Tesla still holding very, very heavy. Our base case hasn't changed on Tesla. We're still looking for this to come back down sub 300 with some gusto, right? What else have we got? We had that NVIDIA chart, which was another nice short on that move back down below this level, right? Once it breaks down, got bam, a lot of follow through. So, that's the way. Yeah, all the charts are all these are from the weekly webinars. This is from the daily webinars. This is what we do on the daily webinar. But, you see, Jim, it's really interesting location now because we've had a little bit of a healthy retracement. And now the big question is, are we going to get follow through? And will that follow through turn it and make it look a little bit uglier, right? That's essentially the big question. Any thoughts on Roku? Let's see if it can load here. It's a bit slow. I don't know why this is taking its time again. Doesn't want to play ball. Okay. Yeah, I think this latest Firefox update has been a little bit of a pain, right? It just hasn't been. It's just been. I know a lot of people have uninstalled it. It's just not working. Always buy the dip, except for Apple. Oh, we'll have to see, but it's funky. Okay, let's see. While this loads Roku, let me see. Let's go to backup. Let's see if so any thoughts on Euro GPB? Okay, hold on. Let me one last try to load this Roku chart, and if not, I'll switch platform and then we'll come back to Roku if it doesn't load. But I'd like to do Roku so we can get rid of these tech names. Okay, well, let's do Euro GPB. Let's get back on. So any thoughts on Euro JPY? Sorry. Okay, so what's going on Euro JPY? I'm looking at it down to the 130 and below euros. So I don't know if you've seen the euro, right? We just did a review of the euro. And so you can go back and look at the recording. We've discussed that in detail. Now, what's happening here on Euro JPY? So I'm not sure what time frame you're looking at, but this is also very choppy. I mean, remember, we've been talking about the fact that there isn't any real follow through, right? And this is, a good way to look at it or to get a feeling for that is that look at where, look at this past action here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 weeks. We're not going anywhere, right? We're just not really going anywhere. I mean, you can look at it on the monthly if you want, but this is what you have to keep in mind is, right? This month is going nowhere, right? By the way, this month is still inside previous month, which, by the way, is still inside previous month. So we're not going anywhere. So this is the kind of chart where you can convince yourself about the long side or the short side, but really it's not going anywhere, right? It's really not going anywhere. Monthly, weekly, it's just looking for direction. And the problem here is that you could easily argue that it's trying to base off this previous resistance that's acting as support. The moving averages are coming in to support, and this is preparing the next coil higher to take out these stops and then to take out these stops, right? And equally, you can convince yourself that the moving averages are starting to go sideways, that this is a very heavy candle, that it's making that it's making a series of lower highs, and that this has to break down. Do you see what I mean? But ultimately, it's pretty choppy, right? Pretty choppy. So here, I think probably the most interesting chart is the daily. And if you look at the daily, what I would say is that you're seeing this very aggressive, see these 2-day streaks where it's getting sold hard, right? And what's happening is it's holding this heavy feel. The problem is that I think and it's making the kind of lower lows here. I think the big problem is, as is apparent on the weekly, you've got all this strong base, right? So what happens is that unless it can clear this base, then there's not a lot going on, right? So 130s is inside here, but it's a very choppy zone. Could this be making its way back into the 130? Sure. Could this still hold this base to rotate higher? Sure. Do you see what I mean? I think there are if you had to choose a chart to trade, there are far nicer charts out there, far clearer charts than this. This is looking very messy. I'd say that it looks like Euro's trying to turn higher, and this is trying to press it higher in sympathy. But if you start to see the risk-off tone on the equities coming in, then it'll probably mean there'll be pressure here. So I think because of that funky action between the Euro flows on negative equities, Euro JPY to me is probably the less interesting way to try. It's not an interesting chart, right? It's likely going to be caught in the crossfire, so it's not particularly interesting for me, right? I think there are a lot more interesting trades out there, right? There are a lot more interesting trades out there than that. This hasn't loaded the Roku yet for some reason. Let's see if this works. Any other charts anybody wants to look at? I don't know if there's a specific problem with Roku. Anybody else in any trades? Anybody's managing any trade? Anything anybody wants to discuss? Let me see if I can. Yeah, for some reason it's not loading. I'm going to try to reload it on another browser. Any view on the DAX? Sure. What's going on the DAX? Well, here's the chart of the DAX, right? So you see that basically we're kind of stuck at these all-time highs, right? And it looked like essentially what the market was doing is trying to move up an extension, right? And get a lot of and get some traction that way, right? So basically back down, held the moving average, and then broke up to new highs. So for us, this is really the key inflection point now, that new high, and it's all about how the market behaves here. Does that make sense? So, and this is on a week on the weekly, right? But what happened is basically it's very similar very similar to what happened here when we got some very bearish closes on the weekly, right? You had this close, right? So it's very, very rare to see this kind of close and to not see any follow through. Does that make sense? So essentially, it's very rare to see this and no new low print. So here what's happened is you actually got that follow through, and now it's trying to base exactly where it needs to base if it's going to hold the rotation, right? Previous resistance acting as support. So this is a particularly nice and an interesting zone on the NASDAQ. So sorry, on the DAX. So here, what's key? Key is how we behave on any bounce off this zone, right? So what the bears are going to be looking at, the bears need to hold the 50 back. Surprise, surprise, right? Let me just get rid of these moving averages, right? So you see the bears really need to hold this, and that's what's holding for now, right? And that's what's holding for now. So that's what you really want to keep an eye out for. As long as that holds, then you got a little bit of a chance at more downside. If that gives, well, you know, then maybe what you're going to see this starting to rally again, right? So this is really a key zone intraday. Now, if that breaks, if those lows break, especially with indices across the board falling, we would think it's a fairly high odds that we come all the way back down and test 12,400, something like that. You know, we would, at this point, you see this rotation higher from these lows into these highs. Sorry, we consider the market is trying to move up in extensions. So if this breaks, we expect the 50 to break. We expect the 61.8 to break. If anything, the 78.6 can catch it, but we would not be looking as these levels as for support. So it's an interesting interesting dynamics here, and it's all about follow through across the board, but the same thing. So right now the fight shorter term is the bears are trying to hold these lows, and the bulls are trying to hold those highs, and the bulls are trying to hold these lows. But you see, we've been stuck here for 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16, you know, for the better part of 2 weeks. Don't get confused with velocity of move inside range. We need to break outside. Does that make sense? So, you know, that's what I would be looking at in terms of DAX. I've reloaded it. Everything works, but for some reason it won't load the. It doesn't seem like it wants to load the Roku chart. I don't know why. There must be an issue with the Roku chart. Okay. EXAS, I have no idea what that is. Is that a stock? Let's see if it loads it. Okay. And you're talking about what are you looking at? You're talking about a big picture view. I don't know what this is. This looks like a complete complete melt up. I have no idea what they do. I have no idea what's going on here. Yeah, very little to say here. This is skyrocketing higher. It would be healthy to see some kind of a retracement. This is very little to say. There's no, you couldn't pay me enough money to buy it here. And the way this is trading, you probably couldn't pay me enough money to sell it, because this looks like it's just complete squeeze on what seems to be very low volume stock. Really not the kind of thing I would be interested, not something I would consider to be tradable at all. USD JPY. What's going on USD JPY? Hey man, how's it going? Timon, how's it going? Rocking and rolling. Good to see you. Um, yeah, here I think on yen we talked about the fact that it's very very choppy around the 112, right? And that the 112 essentially is the big pivotal level, right? Um, so essentially, what's going on here? And we've had this little bit of a squeeze coming back in, right? So as long as it holds above the 112, you'd have to expect that there's a potential for this to squeeze up all the way into back into the 114.50s. See, so I think this is also in terms of Momo chart, this is a more interesting chart to look at here. And the question is, today, right, my game plan for today, or the way I would be looking at this for today, is clearly as long as we hold above that 112, there's very little edge in trying to get short, right? Most likely this is going to continue to squeeze, and there's no reason why this couldn't easily squeeze all the way back into the 114.50s. So again, so I think if you're looking to sell, as long as it's above the 112, unless it's on a headline, I'd be waiting for it much higher, right? And similarly, if into the open we get a little bit of selling, we get equity sell off, God knows what, it starts to sell off. The moment it moves back below the 112, then I think that's going to be an interesting intraday short for a retest of those lows. But bottom line, in terms of the bigger picture too, is just very, very choppy, right? It's just been very, very choppy. So, you know, we'll have to wait and see. But I think there's, it's bid, it's in squeeze mode. It's likely going to try and continue to squeeze higher here. And if you're looking to get short, I think the shorts are probably further, the high odds shorts are probably waiting further up or on a move back below the 112. As long as we're holding above, it looks like it wants to squeeze. It's very, very, very choppy here, right? What's IBEX? So what's going on the IBEX? So here, not something which we look at that much, but if you're looking at it from a bigger picture, see, it's kind of like that. It's just kind of stuck here a little bit, right? It's basing off psychological level round number after this move higher and the panic of Catalan panic, right? So as long as this holds, you'd think that most likely it's going to try and come back and test these highs, right? It looks like it's fairly bid here, right? Looks like people are fighting hand over fist to get themselves some of this IBEX. Now, what's interesting here is you see even on the weekly how it held that 200, and we talked about if that broke, then it get very heavy. So here, this is bullish, right? It's looking strong. If you look at it even on the daily here, it's trying to move up. So if it can, this is an interesting one, right? Because it's probably around, this is around a 78 retracement, something like that. Eyeballing it, let me put a fib up. Yeah, so you see this 200 is coming in pretty much at the 78. So this is a really key zone for the bears. So I think here, if the if equities turn down, then the bears might come in across the board, and this might be a very interesting sell zone, assuming these highs hold, right? So this is pretty much your risk for this to try and come back down and break those lows and make the final move lower. But the way this is trading here, it's a little bit bid, right? It really looks like it wants to take out more and more stops and try and move back towards those highs, right? The way I look at this chart, for me, it's a chart that is not cheap enough to buy, and it's not expensive enough to sell. I consider here this high and this low as being lines in the sand, and here we're fairly neutral in the middle, so it doesn't look that interesting to me, right? So I don't know if you have a specific question, but it's not that interesting to me. XPD, oh, that's interesting. XP, so there's a printer error. That's really interesting because I'm not trying to print anything. So XP, it's interesting. It looks like it's thinks I'm calling up the printer when I'm calling for XPD. Let's see if it does it here. No, for some reason I can't type an X. That's bizarre. So we're gonna have to skip on. We'll try in a second on Palladium in a second. What are upside targets on SPX? Yeah, because the X is a shortcut to the printing. That's why it's calling it. It's just try and click anywhere on the screen and just type. Okay. No, it's calling up this printer for some reason. Upside targets for SPX. So if there's any tech whiz that knows what's going on, more than happy, let me know. Maybe space XPD. Okay, let's try space XP. No, it's calling up the printer. Really strange. So upside targets for XPX. Okay. So that's an interesting one, right? Now we're in complete melt up mode, right? So I think the way I would look at upside targets on SPX is just any round number sounds good. Does that make sense? Right? It's like any round number. So here essentially the way I would look at it is if you're looking at these lows into these highs, here essentially we've just completely gone parabolic, right? So the time we started to really retrace was at the kind of the 50 back here. So you could extend your fib to these new highs, and that would give you upside targets of the 50 is 26.97 and then 27.67. Thanks, Debbie. But really, with this kind of melt up, personally, I would have no upside targets. For me, it's just the question of round numbers. Market's just going to try and take out round numbers. There's no real. I wouldn't look at it in terms of any real logic. We already looked at a bunch of those stocks. You can look at the beginning of the session. Yeah, sure. ZBs, this is an interesting one. We've been talking about this for a long time, and essentially it's very, very choppy, right? And you know, you can look at it as much as you want, but what we said is you've got, well, ultimately we're bearish, right? But what we said is, look at this here. You've got two chop zones, right? You've got this chop zone and you've got the broader chop zone. So you see what happens when people tried to get short outside of the box, they got killed. When they tried to get long on the breakout, they got killed, right? there's just not an awful lot of edge. We need the next big catalyst. Still think, of course, that the market is really not pricing in all the hikes. So, but essentially here, we're still not moving, right? We're really not going anywhere. Again, if we, especially after we've had pretty much 3 tests of these highs, should we come back and give through the 52, that could get extremely ugly. Now, also, we had the roll on, we just had the roll, so you had that big volume on the roll, but this is looking a little bit heavy. So I don't have any particular positions on here, but the way this is trading, I would assume this is trying to come back down and test the 152s again, and that's where the game will likely be played. Okay, Tiemann Bunds, what's going on, Bunds? Where was it? We had a better feed, right? We had a couple of bad feed. We had a better feed on the Bund. Is this the good feed? So what's happening here on the, does this look like the good one we were using, Tiemann? So here you see we're still kind of stuck in the middle of nowhere, right? But yeah, we've been saying this is an accident waiting to happen, right? And look at how choppy it's been, but it can't manage to catch a bid, right? So I think here the big risk, and it's it's the same as the ZBs, is really that we break down and we get a little bit of Momo at these lows, and then you see that real acceleration, because it's not looking pretty. You go back on the daily, you see how you've got ranges inside the ranges, kind of like that ZB. So it's still kind of stuck. And people have been asking me to look at Bunds, look at ZBs for ages, but there's just not that much to do, right? They're still, they're just stuck. It's all about these lows here, if they can hold. It's going to be very, very interesting, but watch out, because one of these days, when this level gives, is going to get pretty ugly, right? Exactly, right? So okay, you're using the but don't you have to have okay, yeah, I know you're using the Eurex feed. But don't you, to get that Eurex feed on TradingView, don't you have to like put in your name and all that stuff for Eurex, to the disclosure thing? Or something like that? That you had to fill in some kind of a Eurex form or something for that. Okay, it's the end of day feed. Okay, cool. I'll look that up. Thanks. Gold. Yeah, what's going on gold? Oh, thanks for the timing, Debbie. Yeah, I don't want to make this too long. If not, then it's going to take ages to upload to YouTube. But gold here, nothing much has changed. Remember, we discussed the fact that this could be very, very choppy and very, very whippy, right? And it hasn't, and nothing much has changed, right? Nothing much has changed. It's still stuck. And as much as, and again, you see this theme across the board, as much as there's no follow through anywhere, right? Look at how long we've been stuck here for. And every time the bulls get excited because you've got a big green candle, the next day it gets slapped down. And every time the bears get excited because there's that big red candle, the next day it rips up. But ultimately, not a lot is going on, right? We're still stuck inside. Oops, I didn't want to move that. Where did I move that from? I think it was the 1350 line. And this is why these markets are tricky, because they force you to try to squint, put an extra indicator, change your view, but there's nothing to change, right? It's still stuck. It's still stuck inside the 1300, 1250. Unless you get a good daily close above or a good daily close below here, you're likely not going to see follow through. And here's a lot of velocity of move inside range. I mean, the way the big thing is either equities, tax bill goes through, equities catch a bid, we go sky high, and gold gets dumped hardcore, right? um, Fed raises rates, etc., or market gets spooked, market sells off, Fed doesn't raise, and gold catches a bid again, right? That's pretty much the way it's going to play out. So I think here there's a lot of choppy action inside the range, right? And it's a tricky one. But as you know, you could make a good case for either side. I think it's extremely choppy. It's not such an easy read, and intraday, it's not a particularly easy one. It's been very, very whippy. If you look at it here on the 1 hour today, you see how it just clipped through yesterday's lows, but it couldn't manage to get any real follow through yet. So that's going to be the big tell today for the rest of the day, right? And as you're seeing, if you look on the other charts, Dow is catching a bid, NASDAQ is catching a little of bid now, ES is catching a little bit of a bid, Euro's down, right? So everything's starting to kind of move in sync, right? So that's the big question. Is it going to manage to hold below, or is it going to catch a little bit of a move? I mean, it's constructive. You're starting to see things moving in sync, right? But, you know, look at it here. And that's what you want to see for the follow through. You want to see the market try and trade in sync. That's the key thing. And, you know, when you're looking at context, when you're looking at that intraday move, those are the kind of things, unless you're very systematic on one chart at a time, those are the kind of things you want to keep an eye out for, right? So essentially here, what you've got is you've got equities up, gold down, yen up, Swissy up, euro down, Aussie down, Kiwi down, right? You see everything's moving pretty much in sync. So that's the big question. Are we going to get a day where stuff continues to move in sync or not? That's the name of the game. That's the thing, and that's what you're going to have to see for the follow through. Okay, guys, so we've gone for about an hour. I'm going to shut it down. I want to make sure the recording doesn't take ages to load on YouTube. Again, just wanted to pay it forward a little bit. Today's the Blogs B Day, so we've been going for about 8 years. So again, wishing everybody an awesome day. Thanks for sticking around. It was fun, and hope to catch you guys soon. Okay, have an awesome one. Take care, and talk to you guys soon.